and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Binod Pivot, to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 grams, Joe Compton. Hey everybody, yes, we're back, another 21 grams, and look who I brought with us today. Tiffany Vega's here. It's funny, we didn't do this at all when we were in person, but I always, whenever I hear your name, I always think of Pulp Fiction, and the moment when they're doing the dance contest and they introduce themselves, and I just want to say, every time I say your name, I want to say, Tiffany Vega. Because for people who don't,
anyone that's ever really kind of said that to me.
For people who don't know Pulp Fiction, there's a scene where they go on this dance contest and they have to introduce themselves, and so the gal Mia Wallace, who is played by Uma Thurman, introduces everybody, and the guy's name is Vincent Vega, and so she goes, "I'm Miss Mia Wallace," and then he goes, "And who's the fella?" Mr. Vincent Vega. So
I really, I never even put two to two together until now.
Well, yeah. So I was gonna tell you that at multiverse, but we just started talking, and that was all you could do after that. You just go. But Anita's here. Hello, Anita. Nice to see you. But yeah, it was great to meet you. It was great to talk to you a lot.
Fantastic. Yes. Yes. And thank you for showing me the ropes of multiverse.
Sure.
You guys really made me feel like family there. So it was awesome.
Well, for people who don't know who you are, I always give everybody the opportunity to start with, to tell everybody a little bit about themselves. So the floor is yours if you'd like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
I am Tiffany Vega. I'm an author of 4 novels right now, or 3 novels and a short story collection. And I am also I'm getting my master's in forensic psychology. And I am the owner and operator of Mood Alchemy Crafts, which, as you check it out, it brings awareness to mental health and supports the LGBT+ community. And that's about it. That's me.
Yeah, it's to start talking about. I mean, and you have a new book out, which we'll get to here in a minute. But talking about psychology, is that always been kind of a fascination for you? Do you like to kind of delve into the deep recesses of a character's mind? Is that something that you do quite often?
I do, especially when they are more on the crazy side, for lack of a better word. More of like the criminal mind. Like most women, we're obsessed with crime shows and serial killers. And I can't even remember how old I was when I was like, I want to interview a serial killer, because I just want to know what makes somebody tick. So when I'm trying to get into writing somebody, I try to really get what makes them tick. It doesn't always come out that way, but I like wanting to know their wants, their misconceptions of the world, why they do the things that they do is a key part of what keeps me up at night when I think about my characters. Would they really act that way, or would they act so out of pocket that people are like, oh, that would never happen, but there's always a reason for them acting the way they act.
Do you kind of conduct interviews with your characters? Is that something that you do?
So sometimes, and for my very first book, which is From the Window, it's a psychological thriller, and it's about a woman who has like multiple personalities.
Mhm.
So I did write an interview with each of her personalities that they have, because I wanted to make sure that each voice sounded different, and that it wouldn't be like something just kind of out of the blue where she's talking one way, but in this way, so people could really understand who was fronting at that moment.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, having read the elements and really enjoying it, there is something to be said about deconstructing a character to a point where you're. I really feel like there's a lot of great elements to an origin story of four different characters in this book, and actually, really five if you count Lilith and so it's very interesting to me to hear you talk about psychology in that respect because it does seem like um bringing that to the forefront and putting that in a book most people would gather as boring, but it's very very interesting to kind of go from the beginning and kind of give them a deeper background, right? And it seems like that was tailor made for the style of writing that you like to write. Do you feel like that's the case for yourself too? Do you feel comfortable in that space?
I do because okay, so I grew up reading comic books and I always like I want it from episode 1 so I knew who they were because if you come
Mm,
into a comic book and you're like, 285, you're not going to know who they are from the beginning. You're not going to know their
right.
growth. You're not going to know their what they've been through, why they are the way they are. And like this is getting into the comic book nerds, but if you read who Magneto was at X-Men 285, he's a villain, but you don't know why he's a villain. And then you come in at the point where he is now, where he's like a hero. You're not going to know why it matters that he's a hero. So
Mhm,
when I read stories and I'm like you start off with a character and you don't know anything about their background and they're growing to this person. Why does that matter to you if you don't know where they came from? And not that it makes stories bad because it's not, but for me it's like, where did they start out at? That's where I want to know. We're halfway in their story, so do we just make it up as we go along? But if we give a character their backstory, then we kind of know more of why their story matters, or at least for me, that's what it does.
yeah, and a lot of people wouldn't put that in a book. They would put that into a character development sheet or anything like that. So it's very cool to see that come to fruition and make it work because it works really well here because I think without that it's very hard to contextualize what is really happening to these four individuals especially, but I mean even to Lilith in a certain aspect, right? She is why her motivation is so dreary and interesting, but uh do you feel like so for you between horror and fantasy, is there a different psychology you take in writing horror versus fantasy, or is it the same
Oh,
psychology of the character, it's just preying on something different for them?
it's the same psychology, but used differently.
Mm,
Because obviously, with like something more of a horror story or psychological thriller, you are telling the story to uh, like strike fear into your reader. So more of its psychology of what's going to haunt your reader a little bit more. Where with fantasy, you're inflicting more of the damage onto your character and using the psychology to usually show like your reader empathy or something more think beyond your realm uh
mhm.
type psychology. So it's the same psychology because you have to know your characters, but how you use it's different.
Do you feel like you're a different writer in writing different genres, or do you feel like you're the same writer? It's just a different approach to what you're writing.
I feel like I'm the same writer because no matter what I write, a little bit of me is always like in
Mm,
there. Like I don't want
mhm,
to write something I'm not going to enjoy like myself. So like when I wrote my short story collection, they were all the stories that I found scary growing up,
Mhm.
but they're all urban legends. But some of them I made up myself. Like I was just like, what is like the worst case scenario about like, combining all my like horror tropes, into a story and make it like as what would scare me. And there
Right.
is, and I have never told anybody this outside my family. There is a story in there that I wrote and I made up, but it gave me a nightmare.
That's awesome. That's
And it's not really like scary in the sense. Well, it's scary, but like it's psychological scary.
mm,
And at the time, my window was facing the street, so technically anybody could be looking in, and it just happens to be about somebody looking into the windows. Yeah, so I scared myself.
mhm.
So I used way too much psychology there.
That's awesome. You touched upon it a little bit too. The other interesting and fascinating element of how you construct story is you're using a lot of myth and legend and a lot of folklore and
Mhm.
mythology. Is that something also that you really like to study? Is that something that it really interests you, and or was that just easy to contextualize the setting of the story for you?
I am a huge mythology like nerd. I have been since I knew what mythology was.
Hmm.
My dream vacation is to go to Greece just so I can see what's left of the Greek mythology ruins. And same thing with going to like Italy so I can see, like the Roman mythology and stuff like that. And it used to be just those two.
Mm,
But as I was like writing the elements and I was starting to look into like there's a whole Hawaiian mythology
mhm.
and you have Polynesian and there's so many different aspects of what people believe that I'm just like I want to know it all. And so mythology has been a big huge part of my life for as long as I can remember.
There's even Asian
Mhm.
mythology, which you touch upon in the elements. So
Yes. Yep. And then in the next one, without giving too much away, there's three other mythologies that are different from the ones that we've seen. So
right. I'm curious, what urban legend did you have to reread or kind of take a step back or research more because you just didn't believe that that could be possibly an urban legend?
okay, well, not okay. The one I think I did the most research for is I touch on Bloody Mary in
Mm,
Course and Time and where actual concept of Bloody Mary came from,
yeah.
and if you like go through and read like normal, it's somebody who died in a car accident, whatever, but it's actually based off of a queen and Queen Bloody Mary. And the reason why she is called that is because she had miscarried and she believed that she was pregnant and she like killed a bunch of people and they
Mm,
called her Bloody Mary. And that's where the myth comes from. And so I went with that like version of it instead of somebody like she still comes through the window or mirror, but it is like where you go after you get taken through the mirror is
yeah.
what I kind of explored on with her. So that was the most interesting one I think I read. Had to reread and like follow up and reread and how do I want to do this? Um, and then the boogeyman because we all
Like
know
the actual boogeyman or like the sleeper cell boogeyman, or was it like the actual like
the actual like where it started and what it's about and just I was just reading what Anita
uh,
said, but it's just so interesting. But out of I think there's 10 stories. I think I made up at least half of them. And Mothman was another one. I love Mothman.
Mothman was a real big topic in multiverse.
It was
Uh, um, what one did you enjoy making up? What was your favorite to make up?
my very okay. So the very first, I put it as the first story in there. It is titled Snatcher, and it is about a something that you call, and it was like the past, people would call them when they were dying of like uncurable diseases and stuff like that, and he would bring them over to um, the afterlife.
Mhm.
And these three kids summon him and get into some kind of trouble. Try not to give it too much away, but nothing happens to the kids, but their parents might have been in trouble. So that was my favorite one, and it's also the most, I think, uh, gruesome of all of them because I really kind of go into some detail about it. So yeah,
Are
that's
you
my favorite.
someone who you so you're your psychology, soon to be psychology major and working on a degree. So is that the kind of horror that you appreciate more, or have you kind of, because you wrote a story that's gory, kind of found a little bit of a fascination with gory horror?
I love psychological horror, and
Mm,
I think we talked about this at Multiverse. One
mhm,
of my favorite movies happens to be Martyrs, and that
mhm,
is, even though it's gruesome, the psychology behind that, and like leaving it up to like what did she whisper in here, like what was it said. That psychological part of it is, I think, the part that I like the most. I don't like that. um, don't get me wrong, 80 slashers, great. I love watching Nightmare on Elm Street, but we know how it ends. The
mhm,
bad guy comes, people fight, bad guy ends, there's a bunch of blood guts. Um, but there's something about like a psychological horror where it's like, did they really win? Or is there really, like it's just something that happens in your mind that leaves you thinking about it for, I mean, I still think about Martyrs years after I watched it.
mhm,
So the psychological, definitely. And I try to write more towards the psychological um, I do with like the slasher.
mhm.
But it's fun to write both. It's really fun to kill off a character a really gruesome way.
Do you find that exploring the psychological in your academic world has helped you in your fictional world?
Yes, yes, because you can understand what your characters are doing a little bit better because one, how the human mind works, what motivation might be behind it, and you can always justify by saying, "Oh, I read this once in an article."
Or I did a paper on it, right? Something
Exactly.
where I researched a shitload.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about George's Curse. Tell me about a little bit about the book and that just came out and what it's about.
So this book is about Norse mythology. Jord is the goddess of Earth and the protector of like the tree of life, and it is about a couple who falls in love, and they just happen to be on different sides of rival temples. One is destined to the main character Asta is supposed to be betrothed to Thor, which
Mhm,
is your son, and she ends up falling in love with somebody else, and they are doomed lovers. And it is the first book of three, and they have to find a way to break the curse because in the curse, one of them is destined to die, and they are every time they meet and fall in love, they repeat the curse activates. So
mhm. Kind of like the fountain.
Didn't see that or
Mm,
read that, but it's yeah, it's I kind of was inspired by an anime I watched that
nice.
had that. So
Mm.
not necessarily with the gods cursing them, but with their lives meeting over and over again. But
The
yeah,
Fountain is a film by Darren Aronofsky that starred Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz, and it's that it's about their him searching for the love and getting reincarnated every time and meeting her up and everything like that. So very interesting.
yeah.
You know,
I love something about cursed lovers. That's just It's the best. So it is a dark romance fantasy. So it's again, I don't like really writing romance. I'm not very
Right.
good at it, but for this purpose, I did it.
So is this a little bit more graphic than the elements in terms of the romance elements?
Not this book, but the second one does have a little bit of spice in it that
Nice.
I'm like, oh my god, my grandma's going to read this. So I figured that they're part of a temple, so they couldn't really get too spicy with them being followers of like a religion type thing.
Mhm.
But the next one is it's free. They can, one's a princess and one's stable boy, so
I would imagine you did or you have some knowledge of, the Tree of Life.
Mhm.
What was fascinating to you? What's the most fascinating thing you found out about the Tree of Life and its origins and what it is?
So with the tree of life, it is the root of all nine realms. So apparently you can like if you were to like follow each route, it would
Mhm,
take you to one of the other realms. And it's like bases on Midgar for some reason instead of in like Valhalla or whatever.
mhm.
But it has that was the biggest thing because I thought the only way that you can get to the other realms was through like the rainbow. This is what we learned from Thor. So, without like doing research, Marvel is what told me, So instead, going over the Rainbow Bridge to get to the other realms, you can actually go through the Tree of Life,
Mhm,
and it connects all living things in the Norse religion together. So it just and the symbolize of just being like you know all life grows and is connected is what I found really fascinating.
mhm.
So
Yeah, and there is some semblance of the Tree of Life in pretty much any mythology or any religion. In
mhm,
a lot of religions base a lot of things off the Tree of Life,
yeah.
which is very interesting to me because, again, I know you. We've had several conversations about several things, but I mean the theology behind a lot of what you do is very fascinating to me as well. The elements has a lot of theology bases in it and different theological
Mhm.
elements. And and I remember us talking about that. I don't know if we did it on camera or not, but we talked about the exploration of all those different theologies and how that was important to the elements because each person had their own belief system, and that kind of triggers the origin stories for everybody,
Yeah.
right? And how they deal with who they become. Um and it sounds like yours curse has kind of that same kind of aspect to it a little bit, the Tree of Life being obviously the center figure of that. So I'm curious for you, is that again, I mean, the psychological elements of theology is probably very, very fascinating to you, but is there something more to theology that you like to explore? Why you like to explore it?
So when I so I always knew some in some aspect I was going to do some form of psychology forensic. Um, when I first went into school, I actually thought about majoring in religious studies.
Mm,
And be an anthropologist. I wanted to go and dig up artifacts and not so much to, and sorry everybody if I offend anybody, not so much to prove that there is something up in the sky, but to understand why people thought that this like item was from, God, Jesus, Moses, whoever that, they at the
yeah.
time we were looking. So it's more trying to understand why people believe the things that they believe. So
Mm,
it still had a psychological aspect to it, but it was, I guess, trying to like confirm or deny what I believed, and but I decided, okay, I can't travel because I started having kids and got married, and I was like, okay, that's going to have to be put on the back burner. So let's just focus on psychology.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm older, my kids are grown. I'm like, anthropology, I can go back to school for another 10 years.
Yeah, the digging aspect doesn't intrigue me all as much as maybe it did back 20 years ago. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't want to dig anything up now. Who knows what we might find. But it was just it's more of the reason like of why people believed that like, certain artifacts held um certain powers and like what what compels us to believe the things that we believe now, without having any concrete belief or justification for it. And I mean, look what's going on overseas is people are fighting for what they believe in and or not believe in. And so I think understanding that all religion in a way it's a belief and it combines us all. It shouldn't be we shouldn't be fighting over things like that. It should be bringing us together because we understand how or why people can believe in something so much. And to me they're all interconnected, like that. If you look at God in one religion and what they believe in another one, they have the same properties, they have the same teachings. It just like Santa Claus, you can call him Saint Nick, you can call him Santa Claus, you can call him something else. It's all what we believe and teaching the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to think that it's a unifying subject that could be potentially people seeing it as a divider, and it's not a divider, it's uniting, we believe. So
I'd be curious your thoughts. For me, theology is very fascinating simply because we all experience it. We're
mhm,
all gonna live. We all live. We're all living, and right now we're all living, and we're all gonna die. And the interesting thing to me is about theology is that I can't help but think that there's some roots of truth in every kind of different theology, every type of religion. I mean, maybe not religion per se, but like the philosophy behind the religion or
oh
the
yeah,
theology of the religion. And so I've always had that internal struggle myself about, what, because I love truth. I think facts and truth are very underrated in a lot of people's eyes when it comes to this. A lot of people get blinded by faith a lot of
mhm.
times. And so for me, it's just fascinating to kind of find the roots of truth in that. Do you feel like that's something you kind of explore? I mean, especially with the elements dealing with so many different theologies.
I think so, like, and I think that there's truth in what everybody believes. How big of a
Mhm.
truth it is what we need to find out.
Mm,
And again, most of the teachings are the same thing: do to others what you want done to you. Be nice, don't don't kill. Like, there's roots of that in all religions. So I would assume that if there is one single truth, what connects them all would be that one truth. Like,
mm.
the things that they have in common would be the one thing that I would be like, okay, yeah, we got to be nice to people. What a concept. Like,
Go figure. Love rules all. Wow.
I think that would be the one big truth behind, like, with all religions.
Yeah.
And um but finding those small little things that connect them, I think that's where we root the truth in.
Mm,
um and then the big stuff, like, rather, going up, down, sideways, whatever,
mm.
I think that's where, like, maybe we're all making something up to make it sound
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Just to make us feel better, right? To
right,
have a little
right.
bit of comfort. And forgive me, I know that your curse is just out there, and I haven't read it. So, and I have a lot of questions on the thing I have read. So, I forgive me if we go down that road a little
Oh no,
too
that's
far.
fine. It's one of my favorite books. So we're it's actually probably my favorite book I've written. And I think I'm getting stuck on book 2 because of the fact that like I have such high expectations because
Uh,
it's like the near and dear to my heart. So I love talking about it. So
it's one of my favorite books too. I mean, I really love the book. I really, it spoke to me very, very highly. But the fascinating thing to me too, right, about on the theology aspect of it, is that you have a hero that's not so sure. I mean, Hecate is not. She's not sure about her standing and who she is and what it's about, and she's not so sure that the theology behind it is valid either because she's been living in hell for so long, even though it's proven right there in her face, right? I mean, she's part of it. She's part of the machine that creates that theology, right? And is working that theology. And yet, then you have the polar opposite of the villain, who could not be more, who doesn't talk about theology at all. Couldn't Is more about selfishness but could not be more rooted and grounded in their theology. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy in exploring those two characters. Is that kind of was that kind of designed, or was that kind of just how it kind of played out? Because I mean, obviously, being a comic book fan, you know that the villain has to have a conviction that is believable to them and that feels like they're the good guy, which I don't even think Lilith really believes that anyway. I don't think she believes she's the good guy. I think she believes she's the bad guy, and she kind of rolls with it a little bit.
I think she knows she's bad because she has been told she's bad for so long. Um, Deep down, I think she wants to be the good person. She feels like she was like um, given the hard end of the stick or the
Mhm,
short end of the stick because of who she is,
mhm.
um, and because she wanted something against. And we're gonna in this. I have a novella that I'm almost done with that is kind of like really her backstory,
Oh,
and you
nice.
get to know more about other lesser known like gods that are not part of the main elements, but
Gotcha.
we we get to find out what happens and why Lilith was cast down from have or out of the gates,
Mhm.
and why she feels like if she could just go back and change something, she can make the world better.
Mhm.
So we find out more about her, but she deep down wants to be the good guy. She wants to change it to make and here it is like stand up against the um, the old white men in the world. She wants to
Yeah.
make it better for women. And
But
she
as long as she's the head of the table, that's
exactly
that's the difference.
she only knows best.
Yeah,
She's the one that knows best.
yeah.
But yeah, so her motivation is she wants to change it for certain people better. She
Mhm.
knows she's bad because she's been told she's bad, and she's loved living up to that reputation. But
Yeah.
deep down, she feels like she's doing it for the betterment of certain people, and so it's a hard thing to like convey because she knows she does things not the best way, but she
Yeah.
feels like she can justify doing it because in the end it's going to be the way that she wants it, and she feels like it's better.
Mhm.
So she's
And
not
it has
necessarily the hero, but she thinks she might be able to become one.
and the funny thing is it has nothing to do with the theology of who she is and what she's about, which is very interesting.
She's just some person who wants to change the world.
Well, her world, but
Yeah.
which again is a good villain. That's a comic book villain for you, and that's a
Okay.
good big bad, you
And I
know?
think a lot of my inspiration with the elements is based off my comic book
Mhm.
history, like
Of course,
just
yeah.
just the whole people coming together. You have a superhero team type
Mhm.
thing going on, and I mean, I don't think. I love reading, but if it wasn't for comic books, like I picked up my first comic book when I think I was 8. Think
Mhm.
think I was 8, and it was like the Punisher War Journals, and I fell in love, and I was like, I can do this. I know
Mhm.
I can. And from there, just developed my writing. Like, I started writing comic books, and then started going into something else and something else, and then I started writing the elements. Like years and years ago, I came up with this idea. And then when I was like, okay, I'm so unhappy with the way that my life is going because I know I can do this, and then I went and quit my job and was like, I'm writing full time, and here I am. Started doing this.
Okay, so I have a deeper personal question for you in terms
Okay.
of this book, because I'm curious about this, and I won't spoil it for anybody reading it, but the beginning of the book starts with an incident that triggers this entire adventure,
Mhm.
and was that the basis for the story for you? Was that a deeply personal something that happened to you kind of idea
No,
that brought it all together?
no, no. It is my love of Disney and the Hercules movie.
Nice. So, based on another myth and another legend, so that's cool. Yeah.
So yeah, it was mainly based off of Meg on the Hercules movie. And I'm like, what is the most like thing that could happen that Lilith might relate to, but
Mhm.
still overlook that situation, like she really wants the soul. So um if Hecate was like, hey, like I wanted to plead with Lilith, Lilith might start feeling a little bit of sympathy for her with this situation, but still be cold hearted enough to be like, well, you were the stupid one for that. So like, so that's kind of it. It had nothing like personal with me, even though now I feel like I could have wrote something more personal. It would have been just as good.
Well, it's hard to put Hecate in that situation without that
Yeah,
moment, right? And
yeah,
and
no,
it's one of those moments when you're a teenager, you go, "I would never do that now," but as a teenager, I could totally see why somebody would do that kind of idea, you
I
know?
don't know if I cared about anybody enough in high school to be like, here, take my soul from me.
Right,
You know,
right. But you could sympathize with that a
I
little
could,
bit.
I can, and it actually, when I watched Hercules, and if anybody knows what I'm talking about, like her Meg doing that in Hercules, it broke my heart. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my god, like you love somebody so much.
Yeah, and it's not even founded love, which is
Yeah.
kind of the interesting idea behind it. But you know, it, and does Lilith have an inkling of who she is when that happens? Because
Yeah.
because I'm sorry, I forget the demon's name. That
Alistair.
Hallister, yeah.
Mhm.
I shouldn't forget the name because it's a fucking cool last name.
I love
Um,
that name.
I do too. I think it's cool. I was that's why I always loved Aleister Black in wrestling because his name was so fucking cool. Um, but yeah, and his character was really cool too. I really love that character. That's a whole other conversation. But Alistair kind of does, or at least doesn't at first, but kind of figures it out pretty fast, right? And so it's interesting to me that somebody's so blinded by who they want to be that they don't see what's right in front of them, right? So,
I can't wait for the third book because there's a reason why Alistair like recognized her right off, like knew something. And
mm.
when it happens, I can't wait for you to get. I want you to be an arc reader for that one because I think you're going to
Okay.
be like I don't know. It's just going to be
Well,
it's
I would
fantastic
be
when you
happy to
get
be an
there.
arc reader for all of them. So yeah, but yeah, no.
But
Oh,
Lilith, she is a long picture person. So if something were to happen right in front of her, she probably wouldn't really notice it until they get halfway down the mile and be like, "Oh, did you see that? We need to go back." Because she's always trying to think 10 steps ahead of everybody, and she's missing everything that's like kind of right in front of her. Um, but it took her a while to realize who she had in her grasp until it was like way too late.
Right.
So
What what is your favorite comic series to draw from? What is one of your favorite comic books that you kind of drew inspiration from in your writing life?
so I love the X-Men. I mean, they've
I can see that.
always the near and dear to my heart, like just again, just a close knit people, of family. Some of my favorite like actual storylines, obviously, like Dark Phoenix Saga, the Inferno. But my favorite story ever in the X-Men is X-Men 303, and it is the death of Magic, Alana
Mhm.
Rasputin. And that is like my favorite story, and just the impact that had on each of the characters in that story was fantastic, like hands down. But other than that, I love reading like some Spider-Man. I love reading Justice League, but X-Men I think would probably be truly the biggest inspiration of books.
The X-Men make me feel old because I remember the day of waiting in line at in the comic book store to get X Factor 1. I was alive long enough, that X Factor hadn't even existed yet. That it existed when I was 12 years old or 11 or
Um,
10 years old, and I had to
that
go get
makes me feel old now.
It's just funny that I think about that. That's why I have a love-hate relationship with the X-Men.
I
Although
ugh, they're so good though. I mean, I don't like X-Men now with
Mhm.
their new storyline or whatever. I mean, it's good, but it's just not. I truly think the best X-Men series were in the 80s and the 90s. If we
Mhm.
can go back to the 80s and 90s style comic books, I think the comic book industry would be so much better off. Um, that being said, I mean, they're not doing that bad. Look at the movies. Everybody wants to see the movies, but um, it's sad. I miss those 80 and 90 vibes of comics.
And the funny thing is too, I'm so contrarian to everything. My favorite character was always Cyclops. I actually disliked Wolverine for a long time because I really felt like he was just an arrogant prick most of the time and kind
He
of one
is.
dimensional. And Cyclops to me was the interesting, the guy who behind the scenes loved Jean and just and pined for her and never could get her, and then they had each other, and then Gene
They
goes
lost.
off and gets
Yeah,
crazy.
he dies a few times. And the Cyclops has always been one of those characters that he's like a true hero. He's willing to
Mhm.
sacrifice everything that he holds dear for his team, and he's definitely like a. I think they use him more now than they ever did back in the 80s and 90s, because Wolverine was like the one man show.
Yeah.
Um, but now they're in like a throuple or something. They all love each other, and I'm just like, I don't like that. I want Gene and Scott to be together, and that's it.
You know, in creating an origin story and putting it together, and then finding the pacing and the reality, and being a comic book fan, did you kind of know where you were going to stop? Did you kind of have an idea of where the ending was going to end for you, or did you have to kind of work through that and kind of figure that out?
For the series or just for book one?
Just for book one. We're just talking
Um,
about book one because book one ends in an interesting spot, and it's a very and it feels very cinematic. It feels very comic book-ish, and I'm just curious if that was kind of the intent. Were you looking at that and going, "That's a great place to pace it for the next book?"
I I knew that I was going to stop it in between them meeting the next element and then where they were at right
Mhm.
there. So um I had to find a way like to where can I stop before we leap into alluding to, something else. So
Mm.
if you haven't read it, somebody sees something and now he's on to the next mission, but they're just finishing this one. And so I was like, okay, this is a perfect spot. Like, I can't go any further without giving anything else for book 2 away. And technically, if I wanted to end it, like, and say I'm never writing part of it again, like,
Yeah.
you know, it's not fair, but it's still a good point to end at. Not that I'm not, I mean, I already have all the books plotted out. So
But the interesting thing is you jump right into the Luke Skywalker Darth Vader dynamic and have that first fight, and that's kind of interesting too, because you know you could have easily built that away and kind of maybe held that for maybe even the start of book 2 or into the second act of book 2, but to have that is that I mean, it seems like to me, and I may be raising your expectations here, and I apologize if I am. And I'm not doing it to do that. I hope you understand that. Whatever it's going to be is going to be, and I'm going to enjoy it. Just trust me, I will. But the idea of putting that at the end of the first book had to have some kind of significance with the way it ended and how it mattered. So
yeah,
you feel like that's why it was there for you.
it needed to be there now, because it one, like, it's clear that that's not the end of her,
Yeah.
but it just means that she comes back with a vengeance. Like, we have to have that final end battle in book 3, and that's going to be the epic, like, um who lives, who dies, is the world going to be the same, that anticipation of, okay, um this character is going to be pissed and have nothing to lose now. There's nothing for her to lose, and so that makes her uh, unpredictable.
Hmm. Right.
So
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, that's kind of how I felt like it was gonna be, but you know, I don't. It's your books, so I'm along for the ride. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to influence you or anything. Uh, Anita says Nightcrawler was her favorite X-Men, so
he's a good character to have as favorite, because he's very, like,
he's the foreign character too, which is the really cool thing about that.
yes, and he's religious, and he's very lawful good, and I
Mhm.
love those characters.
I love the idea that here you've got Stan Lee putting together a team, and the team decides, hey, look, we need a backbone of a guy who's kind of seeing it from a different perspective, and that's always what Nightcrawler was to me. That Nightcrawler was the pompous, European who kind of had that European flair to him, but always had like a reasonable
Yes,
s- idea about it, right? So that I thought that was an interesting addition to the X Men when they did that.
yes, definitely. Yeah.
And, uh, yeah. So are you? I mean, now recently you've done fantasy back to back here,
Mhm.
and you're working on Elements 2, and Yours Curse has 2 more books to go as well, you
Yep.
said. So, are you kind of really deeply entrenched in fantasy, or do you plan to go back to horror at some point?
I have Okay, so I have a whole list of things that I want to get accomplished. I actually have um, the second, third book written already for York's Curse. I'm just in the
Mhm,
final editing and stuff. So those are going to be, I think, going to be more of a rapid release. Going to have one
mhm.
that comes out in March, and probably one that comes out just a few months after that one. Um,
Nice.
and then obviously book 2 of the Elements is coming out. But then I have a book called Forgotten Destinies, which is a going to be a vampire, dark, kind
Hmm,
of gruesome. It's gruesome story. And then I have a story called The Monster in My Bed, that is strictly a psychological horror movie or book. So I do have two planned to come out, but they probably won't be out until sometime early 2025 if everything goes as planned. So, so yeah, my next couple of ones are going to be fantasy, but then I'll hit back to the love of psychology horror.
Okay, so you mentioned you don't write differently with the genres, but do you approach the genres differently simply because horror typically is a lot smaller of a book than fantasy typically is? Do you have to psych yourself into a horror aspect? Do you have to kind of is there like get a darker playlist, or is there something you do that kind of is different from when you're writing your fantasy?
I think that, yeah, I think I will watch, and because I'm a very visual person, so
Mhm.
usually when I like write my fantasy, I stay strictly into like the fantasy, romantic, cutesy movies. Where when
Mhm.
I start like writing towards like my horror and stuff, I tend to watch things that are more dark. Um, and like when I was doing From the Window, I was watching that Johnny Depp movie, where he had multiple personalities. Not that I'm trying to give away the whole, um, but I was watching movies like that, and
Mhm.
something more psychological thrillers. And when I wrote Horrors of Time, it came out during Halloween, so I was watching Halloween movies, to get myself into the spirit of like this slasher movies and stuff like that. So I don't I listen to music, but my music's pretty dark anyways. No matter when listen to it, like,
Yeah.
metal and stuff like that. So people always, see
Mhm.
that as being dark, but it's more just what I watch and what I like and what I read. So if I'm reading, a book for pleasure, then it's going to be something a little bit more dark to give me inspiration to get into that psyche of, you know, let's go kill somebody.
Yeah, it's a little different. You could even go different with metal, though. You can go Dragon Force for your fantasy, and an Iron Maiden for your
Yeah,
fantasy, and then go, you know, uh, a Cannibal Corpse for your horror.
yeah, death metal, yeah.
You know, which is cool. That's the cool thing about metal. But as I was gonna ask you, is music a strong influence for you in your writing? Do you feel like music plays a part in that at all?
It depends. Like it depends on the song. Like I have a song that I am writing or that I listen to that I again another one of my to be like when I get to it.
Hmm.
But I know that when I am writing that particular story, that I listen to this song because it's like so impactful, and for that character, like it speaks to that character, so therefore it's speaking to me when I'm writing her.
Hmm.
Um, but it's more movies and stuff that I watch at the time that is impactful to me. Music is great. I love music. I listen to it all the time. But when it comes to creativity, it's more I'm more visual. I want to see it playing out. Like when I'm watching a movie, I analyze the characters that I'm watching. Like, now, would they really do that?
Yeah.
Like most horror movies, the girl's running up the stairs instead of out the door for help. Would they
Yeah.
really be doing? So I try to analyze what I'm watching and how can I put that into a story? How can I make that story a little better?
Yeah, it's like that Geico commercial, right, where they're all in the little horror, where they're all cuddled, and she goes, "We should get in that running car. What are
Yeah,
you, crazy?
we're like,
Let's go
no,
hide behind the chainsaws."
exactly. That's in most horror stories.
Yeah.
The main character is usually not making the best decision, um, and puts themselves in a worse situation. And like psychologically, how can you make the character make the right decision, but it's still
Mhm.
not good for them?
Does gaming have any influence for you? Do you play games to kinda get into a writing mood?
Yes. Now, just because we talked about this on at Multiverse, I was
Yeah.
on a panel for how games affect my writing, affects my gaming. And of course, Final Fantasy is one of my favorite games of all times. And again, it's all about a group of people coming together to, and that's like exactly what the elements is. And sorry, my phone's going off.
That's
And
right.
it just happens to be Alistair that's talking to me from Dragon Age. Um, love that name. But Final Fantasy, they all come together, have to beat the big bad, and or fight the big bad. So it definitely influenced my thought on the elements. Um, so I tend to play a lot of fantasy games because I like that fantasy aspect. I want to be an elf. I want to be a witch. I want to be something different. I don't play a lot of horror games though.
Mm. Does
So
it help you with pacing and kind of figuring story out too by playing a game and kind of going through the motions?
I think so. I it definitely because I think you can tell when you get to a game and you're done with Act One. You've had your rise. You've had and then you know that you're done with Act Two when you're at that pretty much that all is lost moment where like you think your characters are all going to die, and that's when you throw down the controller and be like, I'm done with this, but you come back and have your conclusion.
Nice.
I did that with Final Fantasy VII, and if anybody's not played Final Fantasy VII, it's the most irritating, frustrating. I love that game so much. Um, where the main female character in the story, she dies, and I refused to play it for over a year to finish the game because that I didn't like it. I did not like it. I was like, I'm done playing this game. Came back after a year and finished it, but it just happens to be what my granddaughter's named after too. So we
Yeah.
have a very strong Final Fantasy family.
Nice. That's awesome. All right. You ready for the questionnaire?
Yes, I think.
All right. We're about to take the Le Questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot and adjusted and perfected by James Lipton on Inside the Actor Studio. And here, once again, I've adapted it. And I don't know if I perfected it, but I have given it a spin for this show. So, Tiffany, what is your favorite word to write?
Oh boy. My favorite word to write would probably be death, probably.
All right. What is your least favorite word to write?
Probably the. I overuse the a lot, and I hate looking at it when I read it.
Yeah, that makes sense. David's was, and same kind of idea, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Hmm. I have no clue. Uh, Probably a good story. I mean, I love reading. I've done loved it since I was like in the second grade.
Mm,
And I think the most creative thing is getting inspiration from when something is really, really good and you're like, that gave me that inspired me.
nice. What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Negativity. Like if something's like really negative, it just it puts me in a foul mood.
Hmm. What is your favorite curse word?
Cookie cake.
Nice.
I don't like to use the C word, so instead I use cookie cake.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What sound or noise do you love?
Ooh, I love birds chirping in the morning.
Mm, cool. What sound or noise do you dislike?
Um, when dogs fight, my neighbors' dogs fight all the time, and it's like real early in the morning, and like they're fighting, not just like playing. They're
Mhm,
like that snarl and that. Ugh, I don't like it.
mm.
It scares me.
Well, I have a feeling I know the answer to this question, but what character of yours would put their face on the currency of their world?
Ooh, well, I have two now. because I have Lilith and I have Jord. Both of them would do that.
All right. What other artistry would you love to try to do?
Ooh. If I could sing, I would love to sing. I mean, I think I can sing, but nobody else does. So that are that's why I did not do karaoke in Multiverse. But singer or maybe like play the guitar, something musical.
Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't get up and sing, although I wanted to, but it was just too crowded, so I didn't get up and sing. I would have this year if I had an opportunity, if I had gotten there earlier. But yeah, but I ended up singing in the crowd, which was great. And I actually did come up when the time warp came on. But anyway, uh, what artistry will you never try?
Um, Probably drawing. I mean, not that I haven't tried to draw. I just know I have no talent in it. So I don't think I would ever just attempt to put any kind of artwork out there at all.
So okay, so if heaven or beyond exists, what would you like to hear God or the entity that is in charge of it? What would you like to hear them say?
Um, you weren't as stupid as you thought you were.
Yeah. Well, that is certainly the case. You are definitely not. I don't know how stupid you think you are, but you're definitely not that. You're very very smart. You've created a very very smart world, and
Thank you.
it was a real super pleasure to sit here and talk to you about it and let me fanboy for a little bit, and I really appreciate that opportunity. So thank you so much for doing that
Thank
for me.
you.
Uh, tell everybody where they can get these wonderful books at, and where they can learn more about you, including Mood Alchemy. Tell everybody a little bit about that as well.
So you can find my books. They're all on Amazon. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can actually read them for free. So go read them on Kindle. And if you want signed copies, you can find them on my website, which is booksbytiffanyvega.com. And you can order t-shirts, bookmarks, mugs at moodalchemycrafts.com. There is some new products coming starting November 1st. So everything will be back. I took a little break because I had some family issues, but everything will be back up and running November 1st. And I have some big things planned for it. So come check it out. If you have any questions, you can contact me at Books by Tiffany Vega. And yeah, that's it. That's me.
Awesome. All right, everybody. We'll be back on Monday with. Well, actually, we have Sunday. We have This Week in Indies, which we're going to be talking about short fiction on Sunday. So that's going to be
I
fun.
saw that it was a thing that Rosemary's talking about. So I still need to reach out to her so I can put that on my.
Well, she's going to be on the show on Sunday, so to talk about it. But yeah, and then Monday we have a double header of 21 grams. I'm finally going to get to do the episode with Bob Magoo and Wayne Termel as well. So join us for that. And until then, everybody, remember that it's always time to go indie now. We'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.